Roland Martin is the host of Roland Martin Unfiltered. And while, Roland, the last time you were on the show, you paid homage to my Kenyan origins, you appear to be dressed in something a little more West African than East African right now.
Yeah, well, that outfit was made in Ghana. So was this one as well. So,
and I think you have roots in Ghana, right? You believe that's where your ancestors...
I was there in December. My DNA traces back to Sierra Leone. But I certainly enjoy my time there and look to visit some other African nations very soon.
Well, we appreciate you being with us this morning. You too, Jack. Jack, let's talk about this. 80% of evangelicals support Trump. That's actually way lower than his support base amongst Republicans in general. But there are a lot of evangelicals who were never Republicans, who are not, I mean, a lot of the Iowa voting base, for instance, are white evangelicals who are Democrats.
Right. What you see in that Christianity Today editorial that you referenced is a publication and an individual speaking to and for a group of white evangelicals who've always kind of been uncomfortable with Trump. Now, a whole subset of them are, in fact, Democrats, but a lot of them are kind of, what might be described as centrists or moderates. And some of them might have held their noses and voted for him in 2016. But if they continue to express this kind of frustration, like we saw in that Christianity Today editorial, there's a chance he might lose some of them. They could vote independent or third party, or some of them might even end up voting for Democrats. So there is some sense of concern within the Trump camp looking forward in terms of shoring up their support among white evangelicals.
Roland, you are a man of faith. And one of the issues in the last several years has been Donald Trump has been viewed as an object of suspicion by some people of faith, although he seems to, there are enough video images of him doing things that look like a guy who is religious. How do Democrats who are trying to court, particularly the black religious vote, deal with this?
Well, first and foremost, look, I'm a Christian author. My wife is an ordained minister. And the reality is this here. White conservative evangelicals are Christian frauds. Let me say it again. They're frauds. If you look at the moral majority from Jerry Falwell and the Pat Robertsons of the world, and all we heard from them since the late 70s and 80s, character, values, morals, and all those things. Yet what they did is they embraced Donald Trump, who is immoral, has no values, has no principles, and frankly is a fake Christian. OK, so let's just cut to the chase here. And so black evangelicals see right through this. OK, we have always seen through this. Remember, it was white conservative evangelicals who held up and supported Jim Crow and who used the Bible to endorse slavery. And so what you now have are individuals who only care about two things. White conservative evangelicals care about two things. They can't stand gay people and they can't stand abortion. And so all they care about are federal judges who are going to drive home their agenda. And that's why they suck up to Trump. And that's why he's given them and the Federalist Society complete reign to pick federal judges. And so they don't care about the poor. They don't care about climate change. And I go back to 2003, Allie, when Alabama Governor Bob Riley, big time white conservative evangelical, wanted to change the tax code to have a $1.2 billion increase in Alabama to help the poor. He even used what would Jesus do to better the schools in Alabama, lost 67-33, and guess who voted against it? The same people who say they love Jesus.
Jack Jenkins, there are people who ask, what's the tie between evangelicals and Donald Trump, given his behavior, given the dishonesty? What's the thing? Is it because of judges and abortion and gay rights?
There are a few different reasons for this. This is the big question that religion journalists struggle with all the time. I think some of it has to do with, just like you said, the judges. There's a transactional nature to this sort of electorate where they see someone who could potentially support the issues and the policies that they hold dear. In addition to that, Trump really does lean into what often is described as Christian nationalism, which isn't necessarily a theology so much as it is an identity, a marriage of the Bible and the American flag that people really resonate with. That's when you hear him in rallies talk about saying, we don't worship God, we don't worship government, we worship God. That's a line that really sells with a lot of evangelicals who might not even go to church that often, but really do identify with that kind of identity. And when you combine all of those sorts of things, a transactional sort of a relationship with Christian nationalism, it's a recipe for apparently shoring up a really strong base.
Roland, who is the Democratic candidate best equipped to peel off at least black evangelical support and maybe some white evangelical support?
Well, I think certainly you look at Vice President Joe Biden, who often talks about his faith on the campaign trail. That's really the candidate, I think. Even you hear Pete Buttigieg, but the reality is he's down significantly among black voters. And so at the end of the day, you see how Joe Biden is doing in South Carolina and other states. So he's more comfortable speaking to that audience. But when you also say Christian nationalism, you got to be very specific. It's white Christian nationalism, and we can't be afraid to call it what it is. And that's why I will call out Tony Perkins and Ralph Reed and Robert Jeffers, because they are not advocating for Christianity. They're advocating for white Christian nationalism.
All right, guys, thanks very much for joining me this morning. Jack Jenkins is a national reporter for Religion Service News. Roland Martin is the host of Roland Martin Unfiltered. Guys, I appreciate you getting up early for us today.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.